Buzzard Roost Cave Incident. William Coughlin was 27 years old. He was an environmentalist and loved camping. William and his friends James and Kevin decided to explore Buzzard Roost Cave in Kentucky. The cave seemed very exciting in the brochure. On May 28, 1993, the three friends traveled to Cave City, Kentucky. They were interested in the large cave network there. The brochure offered two tours. There was a historic tour for easy exploring. There was also a wild cave tour for brave people. They first chose the historic tour. Before starting, they signed a form. This form said the cave operators were not responsible if something went wrong. Kevin decided to stay above ground. William and James completed the historic tour. Then they chose the wild cave tour despite warnings from the guide about its dangers. The group was led by a guide named Dave Harden. Each person got a helmet with a flashlight. The guide said everyone needed to stay close together. As they went deeper, the cave's challenges became clear. After squeezing through a narrow passage, they found the first of two ladders. This was a 30-foot cable ladder with wooden rungs. The guide led the way and they carefully went down. Then they crawled a short distance to reach the second ladder. William was 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds. He struggled to fit through the narrow tunnels. William got stuck at times. After 45 minutes, they reached the second ladder. This was a 60-foot aluminum ladder also attached to a rock wall. While taking pictures on the second ladder, William stepped onto an unstable ledge. The ledge broke and William fell about 50 feet. He hit his head and was knocked unconscious. Everyone panicked as the cave guide called for help on his radio. The group waited anxiously for rescue. William woke up, but he was confused and in terrible pain. He was bleeding heavily from a severe head injury. The group tried to comfort William. The guide tried to give basic first aid. The cave's depth made it hard for rescuers to reach them quickly. The guide kept saying that help was on the way, but tension filled the air as William's condition got worse. As time passed, James and the guide knew they had to act fast. William's condition made it impossible for him to climb the ladders to the entrance, so they chose a risky alternative route. This path was rarely used because of its dangerous narrow sections, twists, and sharp rock formations. It was challenging even for someone who was not hurt. They had no other choice because every minute counted. Amazingly, they managed to get William through the first part of the narrow passage. Next, they faced dangerous V-shaped rock formations. James went through first, crawling on his belly. Then he helped William, who entered head first. William's fear and pain got worse as he struggled to move forward. The sharp rock edge dug into his stomach. William was stuck and could not move. James and the guide were horrified. They were seeing William in trouble for the second time. William begged for help, his voice full of pain. His lungs were compressed against the rocky walls. The guide told James to inform the cave owner about the serious situation. Finally, after a painful wait, the rescue team could be heard in the distance. They reached William and checked his critical condition. They carefully put William on a stretcher. They began the difficult journey out of the cave, trying not to hurt him more. As they came out into the bright sunlight, the medical team took over. They rushed William to the hospital. Tragically, William died from his injuries the next day. Jonathan Cave Incident. Jonathan Cole was a 27-year-old outdoor enthusiast. His best friend Ferguson Lahar was 26 years old. Ferguson often joined Jonathan on cave trips. This cave had narrow, unpredictable passages that made it a true challenge. The journey began on a cool, clear morning. The entrance was a dark, gaping hole in the side of a cliff. It was barely visible among the rocks and boulders. With their headlamps lighting the way, they went down into the cave. The first passage was wide enough for them to walk side by side, but soon it began to narrow. The walls closed in around them. The rock was cold and damp to the touch. As they went deeper, the cave started showing its true nature. The passageways twisted and turned in all directions. Some were so tight that they had to squeeze through sideways. Their bodies were pressed uncomfortably against the rock. Despite the challenges, they kept going. Hours passed as they navigated the winding tunnels. Eventually, they reached a point where the tunnel split into two narrow passages. One went to the left and one went to the right. After a brief discussion, they decided to take the left path. They believed it would lead them to a beautiful chamber. The left passage was immediately more difficult than the others. It was a low, narrow tunnel that forced them to crawl on their stomachs. Halfway through the passage, Jonathan was leading and realized something was wrong. The tunnel was narrowing even more. He could barely move forward. Jonathan tried to back up, but the tight space made it nearly impossible. He was stuck. Panic began to set in as Jonathan struggled to free himself. He called out to Ferguson, who was a few feet behind him. His voice echoed through the tight space. Ferguson tried to reach out to help, but the narrow passage limited his movement. The two men were trapped in the belly of the cave. It was squeezing the air from his lungs. His muscles strained as he tried to wiggle free. They realized they had made a mistake by not bringing a third person. This is the golden rule of caving. One person stays with the stuck person while the third gets help. In a final desperate attempt, Ferguson tried to push Jonathan forward. He hoped they could force their way through the narrowing tunnel, but the passage was unforgiving. The rock seemed to tighten its grip even further. Jonathan cried out in pain as the walls tore his clothes and skin. Ferguson realized they were out of options. He made the hardest decision of his life. Ferguson told Jonathan that he would try to back out of the passage and go for help. Jonathan, barely able to speak, agreed. He urged Ferguson to go. With great effort, Ferguson began to inch backward through the tight passage. It was a slow, painful process. Every movement was a struggle. Ferguson finally made his way out of the narrow tunnel. By the time Ferguson came out of the cave, he was exhausted and confused. Ferguson contacted the rescue team immediately. A team of rangers who were the nearest were sent to help. They gathered their gear and followed Ferguson back to the cave. When they finally reached Jonathan, hours had passed since Ferguson had left him. The rescuers found him unconscious, still wedged in the narrow tunnel, but Jonathan was alive. They chipped away the rocks that surrounded Jonathan. They used ropes to pull him out. The pulling went on for a long time. Eventually, they were able to get Jonathan out of his misery. Jonathan was rushed to the hospital. It took him weeks to recover. Lechuguilla Cave Incident. Emily Davis Mobley was a 40-year-old experienced caver. She went on an expedition to map unknown sections of Lechuguilla Cave in New Mexico. Lechuguilla is one of the deepest and most complex caves in the world. Emily and her team went into the cave to explore and map new areas. They navigated through tight squeezes, jagged rocks, and vertical drops. After hours of exploration, the team reached a remote section of the cave. This area was rarely visited because it was very difficult. Emily led the way, squeezing through a narrow passage. The walls pressed against her as she moved forward. Her helmet scraped against the ceiling. Emily tried to move through an even tighter spot. She placed her hand on a massive boulder to move up. The boulder had been loosened by years of dripping water. The massive boulder slipped and crashed down on her leg. It jammed her leg into a crevice. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. She was miles deep into the cave, far from any help. The rest of the team realized something had gone wrong. They came to help and moved the massive boulder off her leg. As hours passed, the pain in her leg got worse. The doctor on her team put a splint on her leg. Now they had to figure out how to get her out. A message was sent to the surface. Soon a full-scale rescue operation started. The rescue was very challenging. The cave's complex layout and extreme depth meant it took hours just to reach Emily. Rescuers had to navigate through the same tight passages. They carried heavy equipment and medical supplies. They knew any wrong move could make her condition worse. They used ropes and pulleys to slowly move her. They were 2 miles deep in the earth. Emily had gotten her senses back. She had been on several rescue missions before. This was the first time she was being rescued. Emily was very experienced, so she led her own rescue. She instructed the team how they should get her out. She even requested food because she was starving. The rescuers created a makeshift stretcher. They began the difficult journey back to the surface, all while carrying Emily safely. After 3 days of effort, the team finally neared the cave entrance. Emily was awake for 30 hours during the final stages of her evacuation. Emily was immediately taken to a hospital. Doctors treated her leg injuries. Veryovkina Cave Incident. The Veryovkina Cave is the deepest cave on Earth. It goes down 7,257 feet. That's so deep you could put 2 of the world's tallest buildings inside it. Sergei Kozyev wanted to explore this cave. He spent over a year getting ready for his trip, but he didn't plan well enough. The cave is in the mountains of Georgia. No one had ever gone alone since the cave was found in 1968. Inside the cave, there are 6 camps where people can rest, eat, and sleep. It usually takes 3 to 4 days to go down and 3 to 4 days to climb back up. Sergei was 37 years old and from Russia. He loved adventure and sports. He had just started exploring caves as a hobby. Sergei learned that a team of Russian cave explorers had gone 6,900 feet down in 2018. They had to stop because of a flood. This didn't scare Sergei. On October 31st, 2020, Sergei told his wife he was going to the mountains. He didn't tell her which mountains or where he was going. He just said he would come back soon. The next day, he drove to Georgia. He didn't get permission to explore the cave, which he should have done. He just used maps he found online. When he got to the cave, he saw a big, dark hole in the ground. He put on his gear, tied a rope to a rock, and began to lower himself down. The first 1,300 feet were very hard. Sergei had to climb down ropes, crawl through tight tunnels, climb over rocks, swim through cold, muddy water. He finally reached the first camp, 1,247 feet down. He was tired but happy. He rested, changed his wet clothes, and ate some food. He found supplies left by other explorers and took what he could use. Sergei went down to the second camp, which was 1,969 feet from the entrance. This climb wasn't as hard. At this camp, he found more supplies, including sleeping bags and food. He stayed at this camp for about a week. No one knows why he stayed so long. Maybe it was too cold, or maybe he needed rest. When Sergei started going deeper, around 2,600 feet down, he began to shake from the cold. The temperature was only 4 to 7 degrees Celsius, about 39 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and everything was wet. Then he realized he had forgotten to bring important climbing gear called clamps and stirrups. Without these, he couldn't climb back up. His only choice was to keep going down, hoping to find gear at the next camp. Sergei made it to the third camp at 3,280 feet down. down. He looked for climbing gear and warm clothes but found nothing. He decided to try for the fourth camp at 4,430 feet. As he went deeper, the cold got worse. The water made him even colder. At 3,600 feet, Sergei couldn't fight the cold anymore. His hands and legs wouldn't work. He couldn't climb, and he couldn't go down. He just hung there on his rope. Sergei got too cold. This is called hypothermia. He fell asleep and never woke up. Sergei's wife reported him missing after he didn't come home for weeks. 9 months later, on August 3, 2021, some cave explorers found a rope at the cave entrance. They followed it and found Sergei's body 3,600 feet down. They used his phone to figure out who he was. They told his wife and asked for permission to bring his body out. They couldn't bring him up in one piece because the cave was too tight and tricky. With his wife's permission, they had to bring him up in parts. On August 16, 2021, they finally brought Sergei back to the surface. Actun cave tragedy. Amy loved adventure more than anything. She really loved diving underwater. One day, she called her friend Alessandro, who was good at diving. She asked him to teach her and go with her on a diving trip in the Actun caves in Mexico. After a few days of training, they were ready. They made a plan. Amy would swim in front, and Alessandro would follow behind with a camera to take videos of her adventure. They agreed not to go deeper than 40 feet in the water. They would follow a line in the water to the end. At 11:26 in the morning, Amy and Alessandro jumped into the water. Amy led the way, and Alessandro followed with his camera. For 25 minutes, everything was fun. They swam and explored. Alessandro saw light coming from another cave entrance. This helped them know they were going the right way. He checked how deep they were and made sure Amy had enough air in her tank. When everything looked good, they kept going. A few minutes later, they passed a cave that people call No Name. Most visitors avoid this cave because it's dangerous. Amy and Alessandro swam past it. Then Alessandro saw something beautiful. Natural light was shining down into the water. He wanted to take a picture of Amy in this pretty light. To take a good picture, he needed to turn off his bright diving lights. While he was doing this, Amy kept swimming ahead. Amy came to a place where the path split in two, one cave on the left and one on the right. She thought she should go left, so she did. She didn't look back at Alessandro because she didn't want him to think she was confused. She hoped she made the right choice. As soon as Amy entered the new cave, she knew something was wrong. It was very dark, so dark that even with her lights, she could only see a little bit ahead. Amy looked around for Alessandro, but he wasn't there. She flashed her lights on and off to signal him, but she couldn't see anyone. She tried again, but still no sign of him. At first, Amy wasn't too worried. Alessandro had been right behind her just moments ago. She was sure he would find her soon. Meanwhile, Alessandro turned off his lights and looked up to take Amy's picture. But she was gone. Just a moment ago, she was a few feet away, and now she had disappeared. He thought she must be up ahead waiting for him. He swam around to get a better view, but still couldn't see Amy or her lights. He waited for about 3 minutes, then removed the markers and line that showed where they had been. He was so sure she was ahead of him. This was a big mistake. Alessandro swam all the way to their meeting point, but Amy wasn't there. Now he was really worried. In the dark cave, Amy was scared. She had been waiting a long time, and still no sign of Alessandro. She kept signaling with her lights as much as she could. Soon, Amy started to feel weak. Breathing became harder. She remembered that, underwater, she needed her air tank to breathe. If she stayed too long, her air would run out. She tried not to panic. Alessandro had to find her. He was her only way out. Alessandro went back to the surface to look for Amy. His air had run out, so he needed to get another tank before going back to search for her. A few hours later, around 2:13 in the afternoon, Alessandro went back into the water alone. This time, he connected ropes and put markers along the way, hoping Amy might find them. A few minutes into his search near the no-name cave, Alessandro found Amy. Her body was floating in the water. Her air tanks were empty and she wasn't breathing. Alessandro tried to help her, but it was too late. Amy was gone. 35 minutes later, Alessandro came back to the surface carrying Amy. It was a very sad day. Ellisons cave tragedy. On February 12, 2011, 10 students, 5 boys and 5 girls from the University of Florida, planned a cave trip. Grant Lockenbach, who was 20 years old, led the group. Grant and his friend Michael Pye loved adventures. The students chose Ellisons Cave in Georgia. This cave is over 1,000 feet deep and is one of the deepest caves in America. It has a famous pit called the Fantastic Pit that is almost twice as tall as the Statue of Liberty. When they reached the cave entrance, they found a small, narrow opening. Only one person could go through at a time. Inside, they saw the beauty of the cave, but they still worried about the cold. In summer, the water in the cave is about 56 degrees Fahrenheit, so in winter, it would be much colder. The group decided to explore just a little part of the cave. As they were finishing their exploration, something unexpected happened. One student's backpack fell into a deep hole called the warm-up pit. This pit is 125 feet deep and has a cold waterfall flowing into it. The backpack had important items they needed. Grant, being the leader, offered to go down and get it. His friends told him to leave the backpack because it seemed dangerous, but Grant insisted he would be fine. Grant used a rope to lower himself into the pit. As he went deeper, he began to shiver from the cold. When he was halfway down, something terrible happened. Grant came face to face with the waterfall. He tried to avoid the freezing water, but as he moved, his rope got tangled. He couldn't go up or down. Then the icy water soaked him. He screamed for help, but the waterfall was so loud that his friends could barely hear him. Michael quickly strapped on another rope to save his friend. When he reached Grant, he found him confused and shivering badly. As Michael tried to free Grant, he also got tangled in the rope. Now, both boys were stuck in the freezing water. The other students knew they had to act fast. Some stayed to talk to the boys while others ran back down the mountain to get help. In less than 30 minutes, they reached their cars and called for help using their phones. It was 2:19 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, in the cave, Grant and Michael's voices were getting weaker as the cold made them more tired. After about 30 minutes, their friends couldn't hear them anymore. The cave and cliff rescue team arrived and quickly went down into the pit. At 3:30 p.m., they found Grant and Michael hanging from the rope. Sadly, both boys had died from the extreme cold. The rescuers had a hard time freeing the boys from the tangled rope. It took them 6 hours until 10 p.m. to finally bring Grant and Michael back up.